We heard this morning in Andy's opening that there are some of these black box issues that go along with food and the animal ag industries. One of those being the transportation sector. And we heard a lot from our speakers this morning about the importance of sustainability and how are we going to raise more food with less resources. And biodiesel actually is an opportunity for these industries to pair both of those together. And for the livestock industry, not only is it a more sustainable way to transport those products to the marketplace and to consumers, it also has a profitability side and a benefit that my colleague Alan Weber will be able to dive into a little deeper in the second half of this. So just to start out, the National Biodiesel Board, we have about 300 or so members, 100 production facilities commercially producing fuel across the country. Those little red dots on the map kind of give you an idea. Pretty regionally diverse industry, a lot in the Midwest, but there's also a lot produced, California, East Coast, Texas, population centers, and also where you find those raw materials that the industry uses. Give you a snapshot of where the industry has come from. That's millions of gallons. So about 10 years ago, a very, very small production capacity of a little over 100 million gallons. That 1.8, 1.75 billion gallons of production equates to about 5% of the on-road diesel fuel market. So to put that into that perspective of how much diesel fuel we use in this country to transport goods and services. Some of the benefits of biodiesel definitely come from those sustainability aspects. So it's cleaner burning, it's a renewable resource. When you think about our current transportation infrastructure, it's set up on fossil fuels. And those reasons for that changing climate that we heard earlier this morning really come into play because if you think about it, fossil fuels are carbon that has been sequestered over millions and millions of years of Earth's history, put deep down into the ground, and what we're doing is we're taking those up out of the ground and releasing them up into Earth's atmosphere. Whereas biodiesel is different. It's actually recycling that carbon through the plant's natural systems, pulling carbon out of the air into plants. That plant matter through either oils or starches gets turned into a fuel. So when that fuel is burned, that carbon is just making a loop. So it was already in the atmosphere before. So we're able to replace millions of gallons of that fossil carbon that we'd be pumping into the atmosphere otherwise. And just some other things. It has a high energy balance, basically. The well to wheels analysis, for every 1 unit of energy you have to put in to get biodiesel, you get about 5.5 units out. Comparison, petroleum diesel is a negative correlation, so it actually takes a little more energy than you get out of it in the production side. Biodiesel is not a new fuel. From that 10 years of growth, we've had many industry champions. All of these brands, organizations, national landmarks, they all rely on the fuel and a lot of them do so because of its sustainability aspects. So trying to become more green. We're just, one example, we were just down at the Kennedy Space Center for Earth Day a couple of weeks ago, working with them on a sustainability symposium of what can they do for all their fleet vehicles, tourist buses, construction equipment, on and off-road, etc. So a lot of folks relying on it to get better at what they do. The Renewable Fuel Standard, I'm sure, is something you've heard of, especially if you're in the livestock industry. It's a pretty hot political issue right now. The biodiesel industry has a little bit different story to tell than some of the other biofuels that are involved in the program. It was originally designed, and the law was intended to essentially require the large petroleum companies to use a certain percentage of their fuels to come from renewable resources. So whether that is a biodiesel, a renewable diesel, an ethanol, cellulosic ethanol, those kind of things. So the idea was to, basically Congress said, we have a problem and here's how we're going to try to fix it on the transportation side. Just one thing to note, if you look over around 2015, you see that conventional biofuels category flatline. Currently in the U.S., most of that is made up of ethanol from corn. So that category was actually built as the base of that program, and then in those out years, so 2015 on, is really where those advanced biofuels like biodiesel really carry the water for the program and expand. And for those that don't know, the advanced biofuel definition by the EPA means it reduces greenhouse gas emissions by at least 50% or better. That didn't carry over my my tags there, but so this is the breakdown of feedstocks that biodiesel producers across the country are using to make the fuel out of. That's one of the cool benefits for me and interesting aspects that make biodiesel a bit unique is that it comes from so many different things. Basically any fat or oil you can make biodiesel into through a pretty easy chemical process that is actually easy enough. It's made itself into a lot of high school science curriculums. So it's a pretty easy and safe process. But the green category, that's about 50% of that, is from soybean oil. And then the other categories, the light blue is animal fats, so about 10% of the biodiesel industry is using animal fats. Distillers corn oil is one of the growing categories, that gold color. So they're actually taking some of the extra fat out of the DDGs out of that process. And then there's canola and then some other oilseed crops in there in that makeup. So since soybean oil is about half of the biodiesel feedstock, we typically use that as our example when we're talking about the economics of the oils and oilseed crops. And it helps to understand, if you start from the very beginning, soybean is by nature about 80% meal, 20% oil, and it's grown for that protein meal that all of you all in the livestock industries are feeding to your cows and chickens and pigs. And historically, that protein demand has driven soybean economics. That's essentially how the biodiesel industry in this country got its start. Was a group of soybean producers said, this oil, we can't get enough of it into the food market, it's dragging down our prices, we've got to find something else of value that we can do with this stuff. So because that's a fixed relationship, the more protein that is demanded, the more oil there's going to be. And that's from basically all fats and oil sources, whether it's soybean protein that's in demand, or if it's more animal protein, you're going to have the soybeans to feed those livestock, feed those cattle and hogs. So there's that more oil on the market. We've talked about this pretty extensively already today, but this just shows of that population growth. It's not really the developed world and not the least developed world that's growing. It's that middle in between, and that's who's demanding that protein. And this is just another example, just from a continent standpoint. That the white bar on this side is 2007 and then 2030. So that's the change in demand of protein. So you can see those from an overall increase of about 40% more protein. So theoretically, if the economics of how soybeans worked were in reverse and oil was the driving market or driver of those soybean prices, as this demand for that protein is going up, that means there's more oil to use too. And so those are locked together. And Alan's going to talk a little bit about why that's important here in the second half. So this is one of the absolute most common myths that we hear. Is that we go to some some event, some sustainability forum, or whatever the case may be, and they say, well, you're not doing things right because we've got to feed all these people, and you can't be putting this stuff in our fuel tanks because we should be eating it. Well, again, like was mentioned in the session before, those negative points are just so much easier to say in sound bites, and you have to get into a little more explanation of why that's not the case. And really what we're doing here, our friends in the soybean world call it the miracle bean, and it's for a reason. That crop allows us to efficiently grow food, feed, fiber, fuel, all on the same acre. So instead of having to grow one crop for food, one crop for fuel to be able to get that growing food demand to markets and to the countries that need it more efficiently, soybeans actually allow us to do that all together in one spot. And it really all just comes back to our reliance on liquid fuels. The heavy-duty transportation, planes, trains, trucks, goods and services, everything we have, every consumer good that we carry around in our pockets got to us somehow, and it got to us most likely on a diesel truck. So to continue to grow the food that we need to feed the world, we also have to grow those other resources that are demanded. So that does include fuel, and biodiesel gives us an option to do that that's more sustainable, it's better for the economics, and it's reducing our impacts on the environment. So that's just a little bit of an overview about the industry, and then I'll kick it over to Alan now. He's going to get into a little more of the in-depth economics and the profitability and how those soybean meal oil economics impact you all as livestock producers. So.